Is Toni Preckwinkle a progressive? Let's find out. Bisolar. I have friends working on Toni Preckwinkle's campaign. In all fairness, I also have friends working on other campaigns. I think I can cover this topic pretty fairly regardless. But I want to be as transparent with you as possible. So there you go. Let's get back to the episode. I'm in Hyde Park right now, home of the University of Chicago, where Barack first kissed Michelle Obama, and they even have a Harold's Chicken. This is Toni's home base. Way back in 1991, she was elected alderman of the 4th Ward, which includes all of Kenwood and parts of Hyde Park, South Loop, Bronzeville, and Washington Park. As an alderman, Toni quickly gained a reputation for being, which mostly meant she was known for voting against Mayor Richard M. Daley's budgets and appointees. In 2004, she was one of only 2 aldermen who voted against the mayor's budget. In 2005, she was the lone dissenter. She was particularly well known for some major accomplishments that are very important on the South Side. She introduced the Affordable Housing Set-Aside Ordinance, which created thousands more units of affordable housing by requiring developers to set aside a certain percentage of all new housing to low to moderate income families. That's pretty cool. When asked if it was legal to mandate developers to build affordable housing, Toni was blunt. If the city can require developers to pay for green roofs in order to mitigate the effects of global warming, then the city can require developers to create more affordable housing for lower income citizens. She also did work in criminal justice reform, like fighting for the release of a police complaint list to hold police misconduct responsible. In 2008, she was also one of only 5 aldermen who voted against the parking meter deal. The deal privatized 36,000 parking meters by leasing them out for 75 years for $1.2 billion. She argued that the mayor's office didn't give her enough time to look over the details of the proposal, and she was right. The deal ended up being a disaster for the city.
Chicago's controversial parking meter deal is costing the city and taxpayers millions of dollars, 41 million so far, and that's climbing.
We also may not have a President Obama without an Alderman Preckwinkle. In his start in politics, Toni was an early backer in his campaign of being a state senator. However, her time as alderman also saw significant gentrification in the area. As the University of Chicago expanded its housing and commercial developments, working class families were often displaced outside of Hyde Park. Things also started changing in the late 2000s. Toni started becoming less of a maverick. In 2007, she voted against the mayor and the majority 83% of the time. But in 2008, her opposition rate fell to 33%. By 2009, it was only at around 23%. It's impossible to say why, but in 2009, after she'd announced that she was going to run for Cook County Board President, she said this about the mayor. "I didn't think it made sense to go for it if he'd made commitments to anybody else or if he was discouraging. He has tremendous resources. So if he'd committed them to someone else, there was no point in me running." Though the mayor didn't endorse her, she needed to make sure that he didn't endorse anybody else before she ran. This brings us to the 2010 election for the Cook County Board President. 4 people were running in the Democratic primary, including 2 other black candidates, Dorothy Brown and the incumbent, Todd Stroger. His father and then himself had combined to be the president of the county board for more than a dozen years. It seemed like the black vote would be split. Toni was not favored to win the Democratic nomination, but she was able to unify coalitions, gather union support, and even release this really strange ad.
"You've earned your pennies. I'll save them for you."
Toni Preckwinkle for Cook County President.
Yeah, that's Benjamin Franklin. She ended up winning convincingly. It was honestly an impressive show of strength. But it was her time as the Cook County Board President that people are more critical of when it comes to her progressive agenda. Don't get me wrong, she still had progressive accomplishments in a leadership role. She helped create County Care, which was an expansion of the Medicaid provisions under the ACA. It enrolled around 400,000 people and reduced the number of uninsured residents using county health services. She defended decriminalizing possession of small amounts of weed, saying that draconian drug laws unfairly led to more minorities behind bars. After bond reforms, the Cook County jail population fell by 15%. She was also critical of Rahm's plan of closing more than 50 schools in 2013. But she's also criticized on several fronts. She passed a sales tax increase that she had campaigned to eliminate when it was originally passed by Todd Stroger. In 2017, she pushed through the pop tax. That proved to be politically costly. The proposal called for a penny an ounce tax on sugar beverages. That passed, but was wildly unpopular. Critics argue that the tax was regressive since it affected poorer families more. To add salt to the wound, after the soda tax was repealed, Toni balanced the budget by laying off hundreds of county employees. It was really sad. Progressives have also been upset by Toni's repeated defense of Joe Barrios. I think Joe Barrios is the embodiment of the Chicago machine at its worst. In 2010, he was elected to be Cook County Assessor. The job is to give assessments on the value of property, which is used to help determine property taxes. This is a particularly important job because Illinois property taxes are the highest in the country, behind only New Jersey. But an incredible investigative series by ProPublica and the Tribune revealed that the property tax system was, and I quote, giving huge financial breaks to more affluent homeowners while punishing those who have the least, particularly people living in minority communities. That falls on Joe Barrios and his corrupt office. It was also common knowledge that he practiced nepotism. Literally days into his tenure, he hired his son and his sister. It got so bad that the county board passed an amendment specifically to prevent Barrios' nepotism.
In all fairness, that amendment was sponsored by Toni.
But he also took hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions from lawyers whose job it is to appeal property tax assessments. This guy is a caricature of corruption, and Toni stuck with him. Toni Preckwinkle says she stands by Joe Barrios. He eventually lost in the 2018 Democratic primary to Fritz Kagi. Joe had been the chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, but after his loss, Toni Preckwinkle was unanimously chosen as the first African American and woman to lead the Cook County Democratic Party. If she were to win this race, she'd be the first person since Richard J. Daley to be both the mayor and the Cook County Democratic Party chair. That just may be too much power. Toni's also had a poor record of supporting other big-name progressives. In 2016, she very publicly endorsed Hillary, not Bernie. For the last mayoral race in 2015, she didn't endorse Chewy even after he took Rahm to a runoff. And most recently, she endorsed billionaire J.B. Pritzker over progressive Daniel Biss. Bias alert, Daniel was my former boss. The Me Too movement has also affected Toni. In the fall, Toni fired her chief of staff over allegations of sexual misconduct. But an advisor had told her about his treatment of women months earlier. Most recently, Toni got in a huge mess because of Ed Burke. Ed Burke is one of the longest serving aldermen in Chicago history and is considered to be one of the last remnants of the city's old corrupt machine politics. There can be a whole book written about Ed Burke and his corruption. In the early 80s, he, along with Ed Verdoliak, led 28 other white aldermen against the agenda of Mayor Harold Washington, Chicago's first black mayor. He's a chairman of the city's finance committee, but also a partner in a law firm that specializes in property tax assessments. One of his old clients, Donald himself. Of course, he hasn't been transparent about his conflicts of interest because he's terrible. There are so many other bad things about him, but how does Toni fit into all this?
In a federal complaint, prosecutors say Burke engaged in attempted extortion by illegally trying to steer business to his law firm, which handles property tax assessments. The 75-year-old finance committee chair appeared stoic as he was told he could serve 20 years if convicted.
As a part of the extortion scheme, Ed asked a company executive for a campaign donation for another politician. That politician, Toni Preckwinkle. Toni's team claims they rejected the donation because it was over the state limit for contributions by an individual, but the complaint said that Toni kept a part of the donation. Toni's trying to distance herself from Ed, but this isn't a good look. The stories are still breaking, so I'll keep you updated, but geez. All of this brings us back to the original question. Is Toni Preckwinkle a progressive? That isn't a question for me to answer. Toni Preckwinkle is a complicated figure. On one hand, she has a long resume of progressive reform. On the other, she has connections to the Chicago machine that has held the city back for decades. Regardless of how you feel about her, she is undoubtedly impressive. Toni Preckwinkle should not be taken lightly. If you want to share your thoughts about her in the comments below, please be productive, kind, and loving to each other. And if you feel comfortable doing it, please like and share this video. I am doing this full time and not being paid, so if you'd want to donate, I'm including a link to my Patreon down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'm excited for the next episode. As the University of Chicago expanded its housing and commercial development,